Welcome back to Tales of the Dark. There's a moment every night when normal places stop feeling normal, when something as simple as a drive-through or a late-night stop begins to feel like you've stepped into something you weren't meant to notice. And this happened to me when I was 24, working closing shifts at a roadside diner just outside a quiet highway town, the kind of place that stayed open later than it should have, mostly because truckers needed somewhere to stop. And I had gotten used to the silence after midnight, the humming refrigerators, the flickering lights, the empty parking lot stretching into darkness. It always felt peaceful, predictable, safe, until one night when the headset beeped long after we had already shut down the grill. 12:17 a.m. I remember the exact time because I checked twice thinking it was a glitch. But when I looked outside, there was a car sitting at the order post, no headlights, just an engine idling like it had been there longer than I realized. I told them we were closed. Simple. Routine, but the voice that came through didn't argue, didn't complain. It just said quietly, "I've been here before, you forgot something." And that alone made something in my chest tighten, because I didn't recognize the voice, didn't remember anyone. But there was this strange certainty in the way he spoke, like he knew me, like he'd been watching me long enough to be sure I'd respond. I ignored it. At first, went back to cleaning, tried to convince myself it was just another late-night weirdo. But when I checked again, the car hadn't moved, not even an inch. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and I started noticing things I couldn't explain, like the fact that I hadn't heard him arrive. No gravel crunch, no engine pulling in, just there. Like he'd been waiting before I even realized it. I went back to the mic and told him again to leave firmer this time, and that's when he said something that made my hands go cold. He said, "Then why is your car door open?" And I swear to you, my car was parked behind the building, out of sight from the drive-thru. There was no way he could have seen it, unless he had walked back there, unless he had been close enough to touch it. And that's when the feeling changed from unease to something sharper, something that told me I wasn't alone the way I thought I was. I locked every door, turned off the outside lights, and grabbed my phone, debating whether I was overreacting. But before I could decide, I heard a sound that didn't come from the speaker. It came from inside the building, a soft metallic click from the back hallway, the one that led to the storage exit we barely used, and I froze, listening, holding my breath as the silence stretched until it broke again with a slow dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. And then the headset crackled one more time, even though I hadn't touched it, and his voice came through clearer than before. Almost like he was standing right next to me, whispering directly into my ear, "You shouldn't have turned the lights off, now I can move." And in that moment I realized something that still doesn't make sense to me even now. The car outside hadn't moved. It was still sitting at the order post, exactly where it had been the entire time, engine running, empty. No one inside, which meant whoever had been talking to me was already in the building somewhere in the dark, with me moving slowly, quietly. Knowing exactly where I was, because I was the only one making noise, the only one breathing loud enough to give myself away. And I don't remember deciding to run, I just remember being in the freezer, pressing myself into the corner, with my phone shaking in my hand, trying to stay silent while listening to footsteps pass just outside the door, slow and deliberate, like someone taking their time, like they weren't in a hurry, because they knew I couldn't leave. And I stayed there until the police arrived nearly 10 minutes later. But when they searched the place, they found nothing, no broken locks, no forced entry, nothing out of place, except for one detail they didn't explain to me right away. Something I only noticed when they walked me out to my car. The driver's door was open exactly like he said, and on the seat, placed neatly like it had been left there for me to find, was my spare key, the one I kept hidden inside the building. The one no customer should have ever known existed. The police told me it was probably someone who had gotten in earlier, before closing, maybe hiding in the restroom or storage, maybe watching and waiting for the right moment. And that explanation should have made sense. It should have grounded everything back into reality, but it didn't, because there were details they couldn't explain, details I didn't even fully understand myself until later, like how the spare key had been taken without me noticing, or how the car at the drive-thru never had anyone inside it, even though the engine had been running the entire time. And the officer even mentioned that when they checked it, the car was gone, no tire marks, no sound of it leaving, just gone. Like it had never been there at all. And I tried to tell myself it was shock, that my memory was twisting things, but that feeling didn't leave me. It followed me home that night. It stayed with me when I locked every door in my apartment and sat awake until sunrise, replaying every second over and over again, trying to figure out when exactly it started when I stopped being alone, because that's the part that bothered me the most, the timing. The realization that whoever had been inside that building had been there long before the voice came through the speaker, which meant he had been watching me quietly, patiently, learning my routine, waiting for the moment when I would be the most vulnerable. And that thought alone made my skin crawl in a way I couldn't shake. I didn't go back to work the next day. I called in sick. Then I called in again the day after that. And by the third day, my manager was asking questions I didn't want to answer, so I quit just like that. No notice, no explanation. I just couldn't bring myself to step back into that building knowing someone had walked through it unseen. Had stood close enough to take something from me without me noticing, and maybe worse. Had chosen not to do anything else, like the entire thing had been a test, like he was seeing how I would react, how far he could push before I broke. And that's the part that stayed with me, that made everything feel unfinished, because there was no arrest, no suspect, no explanation that tied it all together, just a report filed and forgotten, another strange incident in a town that didn't ask too many questions. But about a week later, something happened that made it impossible to move on. Something small at first, something easy to dismiss if you wanted to ignore it. I was driving home late again, not from work this time, just from trying to distract myself, trying to feel normal again. And I stopped at a gas station about 15 minutes from my apartment, the kind that stays open all night, bright lights, security, cameras, a place that should have felt safe. I parked, got out, and as I walked past my car, I noticed something on the windshield. A small folded piece of paper tucked under the wiper, and my first thought was that it was just a receipt or some trash that had blown in, but the moment I picked it up, something felt wrong. It was too deliberate, too neatly placed. And when I unfolded it, my stomach dropped in a way I can't really describe, because written on that paper in the same thick black marker style I had seen before were just 5 words: "You left too early that night." And I remember standing there under those harsh fluorescent lights, feeling completely exposed, like the brightness didn't matter, like none of it mattered, because whoever had left that note had been close enough to my car again, close enough to touch it without me noticing. And the worst part wasn't even the message itself, it was what it implied, that he had been there watching me even after everything that happened, watching me move on, watching me try to forget, and deciding to remind me that it wasn't over. That it hadn't ended in that diner, it had just paused. And I looked around the gas station parking lot, trying to see anyone, anything out of place. But there was nothing, just a couple of cars at the pumps, a man inside paying for something completely normal, completely quiet. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from somewhere just outside my line of sight, like he was there again, just waiting for me to notice him. And I got back in my car and left immediately. I didn't even go inside, I just drove, checking my mirrors over and over again the entire way home, expecting to see headlights following me, expecting to see that same presence trailing just far enough behind to stay hidden. But there was nothing, just empty road and the sound of my own breathing filling the silence. And that should have made me feel better, but it didn't, because by then I understood something I hadn't before. He didn't need to follow me to be there, he didn't need to be visible to stay close, and whatever had happened that night in that diner wasn't random. It wasn't chance, it was something planned, something intentional, and I had only seen the beginning of it. The thing about fear is that it doesn't hit all at once, it builds, it lingers, it settles into your routine, until even the smallest detail starts to feel like a warning. And after that night at the gas station, I stopped believing in coincidences completely, because there was no logical way someone could keep getting that close to me without being seen, unless they had already figured out every part of my life, my habits, my timing. The places I went when I thought no one was paying attention, and I tried to change everything. I stopped going out late, stopped taking the same routes, even started parking in different spots. Every time I came home, checking my surroundings like I was being hunted. But no matter how careful I got, that feeling never went away, that quiet awareness that I wasn't the only one paying attention anymore. And about 10 days after the note, something happened that made it impossible to pretend I was imagining things. I came home earlier than usual that night around 9 p.m. The apartment complex was still active, people walking, dogs, lights on in most windows, the kind of normal environment that should have felt safe. And as I pulled into my parking space, I noticed my apartment door slightly open. Not wide, not broken, just enough to be wrong, just enough to make my stomach drop instantly. because I knew for a fact I had locked it. When I left, I always double-checked, especially after everything that had happened. And I just sat there in my car staring at it, trying to convince myself maybe I'd forgotten, maybe I'd been distracted. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. I called the police again before even stepping out. Waited in the car with the doors locked until they arrived, and when they went inside to clear the apartment, I could barely breathe, just sitting there imagining someone standing in the dark, inside waiting, listening. But when they came back out, they told me the same thing I had heard before. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, nothing damaged, everything looked exactly the way it should have been, except for one thing they almost didn't mention, because it didn't seem important at first. Something small. Something easy to overlook unless you knew what you were looking at. And when I went inside, I saw it immediately, sitting right there on my kitchen counter, where I knew I hadn't left it. My spare key, the same one that had been taken from the diner. Placed perfectly in the center, like it had been returned on purpose, like whoever took it wanted me to know that they could come and go whenever they wanted, that locks didn't matter, that distance didn't matter, that nothing I did could actually keep them out. And I remember just standing there staring at it, feeling that same cold realization creep in again, stronger this time, heavier, because now it wasn't just about being watched anymore. It was about control, and whoever this was had it completely. They could reach me whenever they wanted without me ever seeing them, without leaving a trace, and that's when the paranoia really set in, the kind that doesn't fade when the lights are on, the kind that follows you even when you're surrounded by people. I started hearing things at night, small things at first, footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, doors closing somewhere in the building, but every sound felt intentional, like it was placed there just for me, just enough to keep me on edge. Just enough to remind me that I wasn't alone. And then 3 nights later, just after midnight, I heard something that made everything stop, a slow, deliberate knock on my apartment door. Not loud, not aggressive, just 3 soft knocks spaced evenly apart. The exact same pattern I had heard at the diner's side door, and I froze instantly, every part of me going still, as I stared at the door from across the room, waiting, hoping it would stop, hoping it was someone else, a neighbor, anything normal. But then it came again, 3 more knocks, slower, this time like whoever was on the other side knew I was there, knew I was listening, and was taking their time, and I didn't move, I didn't make a sound. I just stood there in silence as the knocks stopped, and the hallway went quiet again. But before I could even process it, before I could even think about calling anyone, my phone buzzed in my hand, and when I looked down at the screen, my heart dropped in a way I've never felt before, because there was no number, no caller ID, just a blank incoming message. And when I opened it, there were only 4 words written inside: "You're quieter than before." After that message, something in me changed. Because up until that point, there was still a part of my brain trying to explain everything, trying to force it into something logical. But those 4 words, they erased that completely, because they proved one thing without any doubt: he wasn't just watching me from a distance. He was close enough to hear me, to notice the way I moved, the way I breathed, the way I reacted in silence. And from that moment on, every second inside that apartment felt wrong. Like the walls weren't protection anymore, but something trapping me inside a space he already understood better than I did. And I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, with every light on, staring at the door, waiting for another knock, another message, anything. But nothing came, just silence stretching on until morning. And by then I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed what I could, threw it into my car, and left before sunrise. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't make a plan. I just drove. The kind of driving where you don't really think about direction, just distance, putting as much space between you and something as possible. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, that feeling started to fade just slightly. Like maybe I had finally broken whatever pattern he had been following. Maybe I had stepped outside whatever routine he had mapped out for me, and I ended up about 2 hours away in a small roadside motel, the kind that doesn't ask questions, cash only. Flickering lights outside each door, and it wasn't safe, not really, but it was different, and different felt like enough at that moment. I checked in, went straight to the room, locked everything, pushed a chair against the door, and sat down, trying to convince myself it was over. That I had done the one thing he couldn't predict. I disappeared, but that relief didn't last long, because about an hour later, while I was sitting there in that dimly lit room, my phone buzzed again. And I remember staring at it for a long time before even picking it up, because I already knew what I was going to see. And when I finally looked, There it was again, no number, no ID, just a single message, and this time it was longer. Just enough to feel deliberate, calculated. Running only makes it easier to watch, and I felt something break in me when I read that, because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before, something worse than being followed, worse than being watched. I understood that wherever I went, however far I tried to get, it didn't matter, because he wasn't following me physically the way I had imagined. He didn't need to stay behind me on the road or wait outside my door. He already knew enough. Already had enough of me to keep going without ever needing to be seen. And I looked around that motel room, slowly taking in every detail, every shadow, every corner, realizing how easy it would be for someone to blend into a place like that. How easy it would be to stand just outside that thin door, listening, waiting, and that's when I noticed something that made my chest tighten so hard I could barely breathe. The small rectangular mirror on the wall across from the bed was angled slightly toward the window. And in that reflection, just barely visible through the thin gap in the curtains, was a shape, something standing outside, perfectly still, just out of direct sight, but clear enough in the reflection to know it was there, watching, not moving, not knocking this time, not making a sound. Just waiting. And I don't remember grabbing my keys or unlocking the door. I just remember running, leaving everything behind, not even looking back to confirm what I had seen, because I didn't need to, I already knew, and I drove again, faster this time. Not caring where I was going as long as it wasn't there, as long as I could put distance between me and whatever had followed me this far. And eventually, somewhere near sunrise, I stopped at a crowded highway stop, filled with people, lights, noise, something real, something grounding. And I stayed there until the sun came up, until the world felt normal again. But even now, even after all this time, that feeling hasn't left me completely, because I never saw his face, never heard him outside of those controlled, quiet moments. Never got anything that made him real enough to fight or understand, just pieces, just presence, just the constant awareness that at some point, without me ever realizing it, I had been chosen, studied, and let go. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. Not what he did, but what he didn't do, because if someone can get that close, if they can learn that much about you without ever being seen, then you have to wonder, how many times have they done it before, and how many times will they do it again? I wish I could tell you it ended there. That the moment I left that motel and reached somewhere crowded and safe was the last time I ever felt that presence, but that's not how things like this work, because whatever this was, it didn't feel like something that just gives up. It felt patient, calculated. Like it understood something about fear that most people don't, that fear isn't about the moment itself. It's about what stays after, what lingers when everything goes quiet again. And for a while after that night, nothing happened, no messages, no signs, no shadows in reflections, just silence. The kind of silence that almost convinces you it's over, that maybe you escaped, maybe you imagined parts of it, maybe your mind filled in the gaps, because it needed something to blame. And I tried to believe that I really did. I moved cities, changed jobs, stopped driving at night, completely built a routine that felt normal again, something predictable, something safe. And for months, it worked. I started sleeping again, started forgetting small details, the sound of the knocks, the exact wording of the messages. Even the shape in that motel reflection began to blur in my memory, and that's when it happened, not during the fear, not during the chaos, but after. When I had finally let my guard down, it was a completely normal day, middle of the afternoon, sunlight filling the apartment. Noise from the street outside, everything as ordinary as it could possibly be. I had just gotten home from work, dropped my keys on the table, and sat down to check my phone. Nothing unusual, no missed calls, no strange notifications, just a regular day. And I remember thinking, for the first time in a long time, that it was finally over, that whatever had happened was behind me. And then I noticed something small, something so subtle most people wouldn't even think twice about it. My keys. They weren't where I had dropped them, not exactly. They were just slightly moved, turned at a different angle, like someone had picked them up and set them back down carefully. And I froze, staring at them, trying to remember if I had touched them again, without realizing, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But deep down, that same cold feeling started creeping back, slow and familiar. And I stood up slowly, looking around the apartment. Everything looked normal, nothing out of place, nothing missing, just like before, except for one thing. Something sitting on the edge of the table that I knew hadn't been there when I walked in, a small folded piece of paper, placed neatly, deliberately, like it had been waiting for me, and my hands felt heavy as I picked it up. already knowing what I was about to see, already feeling that same dread settle into my chest before I even opened it. And when I did, there were only 6 words written inside in that same thick black ink. The same unmistakable handwriting I had tried so hard to forget. You're finally starting to feel safe. And I don't think I've ever experienced fear like that before, not loud, not sudden, but quiet, suffocating, the kind that sinks into you slowly as you realize something you can't undo. Something you can't escape, because it doesn't matter how far you run, how much you change, how carefully you rebuild your life. If someone has already learned you once, they can learn you again, and that's the part I can't shake even now, even telling this. Sitting in a place that should feel safe with people around me, lights on, everything normal, there's always that thought in the back of my mind. That quiet question I can't answer. How long has it been since the last time? And how close are they right now? I didn't call the police that time, and I know that sounds wrong. I know it's the first thing anyone would say to do. But after everything that had already happened, after every time, they found nothing, no signs, no evidence, no way to explain how someone could get that close without being seen. Something in me just stopped believing it would help, because how do you explain something that leaves no trace? Something that doesn't break in, doesn't take anything, doesn't even reveal itself fully. It just appears in the smallest ways possible, enough to let you know it's still there, still watching, still learning. And that note, those 6 words, they did something worse than all the others. They didn't warn me, they didn't threaten me. They observed me, they showed me that even after months of changing everything, after building a new life in a new place, he could still read me, still understand exactly where I was mentally, like I hadn't escaped at all. Like I had just stepped into the next phase of whatever this was. And that realization changes the way you think about everything, because it's not about a place anymore, it's not about a routine, it's about you, about the patterns you don't even realize you have. The habits you fall back into without thinking, the small predictable things that make you human, because those are the things he notices, those are the things he uses. And once I understood that, I stopped trying to feel safe, I stopped trying to recreate normal. Because normal is what made me easy to find in the first place. I started living differently, unpredictably, never staying in one place too long, never following the same schedule twice, always checking reflections, windows, anything that could show me what I couldn't see directly. And maybe that sounds extreme. Maybe it sounds like paranoia, but when you've experienced something like this, you don't get the luxury of ignoring it, because ignoring it is what gives it space to get closer. And for a while that worked, or at least I think it did, because there were no more notes. No more messages, no more signs that he was there, just silence again. But this time it felt different, heavier, like the kind of silence that isn't empty, just waiting. And I started noticing something else too, something I never expected. Something that bothered me almost as much as the fear itself. I started forgetting parts of it, not everything, but small details, the exact tone of his voice, the shape I saw in that motel reflection, even the way the handwriting looked. It all started to blur. Like my mind was trying to protect me by letting it fade, and that should have been a good thing. It should have meant I was moving on, healing, but instead it made everything worse. Because if I couldn't remember those details clearly, then how would I recognize them if they came back? How would I know if I saw him again, passed him on the street, stood next to him in a store? How would I know if I was looking directly at the person who had been watching me all this time? And that's the thought that never leaves, the one that follows me no matter where I go, because the truth is, I don't know what he looks like. I don't know who he is. I don't even know if it's just one person anymore. All I know is the pattern, the way it starts, the way it builds slowly, until you realize too late that you've already been chosen, already been studied. And maybe that's why I'm telling this now, not just to get it out, not just to make sense of it, but because if you've ever had that feeling, that quiet moment where something feels just slightly off, where a place that should be normal suddenly is, where you notice something small that doesn't quite make sense, don't ignore it, don't brush it off the way I did at the beginning, because sometimes those small things are the only warning you get before it becomes something much bigger, something that doesn't just go away, something that follows you long after you think it's over. And even now, after everything, after all the time that's passed, there are nights when I still wake up suddenly for no reason at all, just awake, heart racing, like something pulled me out of sleep. And I lie there in the dark, listening, not moving, not breathing too loud, waiting for something, anything. And most nights, there's nothing, just silence. Just my own imagination trying to fill the gaps, But sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I hear it again, 3 slow knocks somewhere close, not loud, not aggressive, just enough to remind me that whatever this is, it never really leaves. If you are new here, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. Thanks for watching.